Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Q&A portion of this week's showcase of Michael R. Jackson. We're really thrilled to have Michael here with us after listening to that spectacular performance, which we recorded about a month ago at the Vineyard Theater in New York. And it was really just kind of a magical thing to be inside a theater again, and especially with someone like Michael. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping things so everybody knows how to participate. We really want your questions. So in order to ask the questions, please look at the bottom of your screen. You'll see a Q&A function, okay? Do not raise your hand. Do not use the chat function. Use the Q&A function. So press that button, type your question in, and I will try to get to as many of your questions as I can. You can ask Michael anything you want. He's game for all of it. We've been chatting for the last few minutes, and he's ready for your questions. We'll go, roughly until, I think we'll cap it off at about 1:30. So we've got a nice 45-minute session here. So Michael, welcome to the Windham-Campbell Festival. It's so great to have you here.
Thanks for having me, Michael. I'm happy to be here with you.
So the first question we have is from Megan, who you know. Michael, do you still watch soap operas? What are your current favorite non-soap opera television shows and why?
I don't really still watch soap operas, although I did start watching Beyond Salem on Peacock because it's like this limited series from Days Where I Lied, and like Lisa Rinna and Eileen Davidson were both on it, who are two faves of mine. So I started watching them. I haven't finished it, but I don't currently watch any of the shows that are still on for a lot of complicated reasons. And as far as non-TV soap operas or non-soap opera TV shows, I have been watching a lot of things, but I have not loved a lot of what I've been watching. So I've been doing a lot of hate watching or indifference watching, except for when I go back and watch old things. So I've been watching Murder, She Wrote, which I never watched when it was on the air. And I watch it almost every night with like a whiskey, and brings me so much comfort and joy just because is what it is. It's very clear. It has a structure, like it's very clean to absorb. It's not like pretending to be something that it isn't. And so I've been enjoying that most than anything. I did watch White Lotus, which I liked for the most part, but I had some quibbles with it. And I had started watching Nine Perfect Strangers, which I hate. I think it's so bad. And other things that I don't have to get into.
Well, it's interesting you talk about White Lotus because I feel like a lot of what we think of as like soap opera narrative devices have been assimilated into what we now call prestige TV.
I mean, everyone has stolen the most superficial aspects of soap telling and none of the what actually kept people tuned in for 30 years.
All right, so we have a question from Bradley Nowacek. How do you define success, and has that definition changed throughout your career?
Oh, yes. I think I define success as doing what I would like to do on my own terms. And I think that has changed over time because, as I was coming up as a younger artist, I had a lot of different expectations of what success would look like monetarily or artistically and so on. And so as I got older and my own sort of personal priorities came into focus, that then determined what success would mean for me, which is not necessarily going to be the same thing as it is for someone else.
How does that change when you start receiving all of these big awards like the Windham-Campbell Prize and the Pulitzer Prize? Does that change your sense of yourself or your sense of yourself as a successful person in the world?
I mean, it's certainly a huge, like these, the awards I've gotten in the last, 2 years have been life-changing and, in very, material ways. And also from the sense of there are people who are able, who are evaluable, who like are very smart and very literate and very used to adjudicating a lot of work and evaluating quality. And so the fact that there's been groups of people who have looked at my work and judged it to have high quality and value and intellectual rigor and so on and so forth, that does mean a lot to me, because I spent a lot of time putting it into my work and hoping that the work would be, sort of as what my mission statement is, to be as challenging as it is entertaining. And so it does feel good, and it does change. I guess, I don't know, but I don't know that it changes anything for me. It just confirms that what I've been doing has been the right move, even though there were times when I thought that no one would ever see anything I wrote, or that I would never have success. But I was like, well, even if that's the case, I'm still gonna keep doing what I'm doing artistically, and sort of that dictated everything for me, and it has been. And so the success has just told me to keep doing that.
We have a question from Peter Marcus, who, if it's
Oh,
the Peter Marcus I know,
he's
Detroit fiction writer. Yes.
Yes, Pete was my he was a teacher of mine when I was in high school. He was a teaching artist who came into my high school when I was like 15 years old, and who I studied with also privately in workshops that he did in downtown Detroit. And he is someone who I love very much, and I owe so much to him. He was one of the first adults artists in my life to tell me to push the envelope and to think outside the box, and to not conform. And that really lit a fire in me that is burning even to this day. So I'm so glad that he's here.
So so Peter says, I'd love to hear Michael speak to the notion of how everything becomes a fiction once it's written down. I think his exact words were, when something gets written down, it immediately becomes fiction.
Yeah, so I am a writer who has literally, since I was 15 years old in Pete's writing workshops, been writing very personal stories. And at the time, I maybe didn't have as much control over my craft as I do now. And so it was, in that time, it was more about just like getting feelings out and not necessarily crafting it into like a story per se. And as I've gotten older, I've still written personally, because I feel like the stories that I want to see in the world are stories that I haven't seen, and I feel like I'm uniquely situated to tell those stories. But that doesn't mean that just because something literally happened, that it can't also be changed, and that in changing it, it doesn't still have the power of the literal thing that happened in life, let's say. And so when I write something down, when it hits that page, it's not just for me, it's for an audience. And that audience is taking in a story, and that story and those words and those feelings are real, but they're also from a character. So it's always going back and forth between reality and fiction. So that's the convoluted way of explaining that.
Allison asks, are recordings available for your musicals? The songs were so good and are already stuck in my head.
Yeah, so A Strange Loop is available wherever you get music, on iTunes, Spotify, Tidal, like wherever you get music, you can pretty much listen to it. And White Girl in Danger is still in development, but my hope is that once it moves to production, that there will be a cast album available for that. I also have some other albums that I put out a couple of years ago that right now are only on Bandcamp. They're called Dirty Laundry, Good Clean Music, and I have a single called 1985, Totally Forever, that I wrote with a collaborator. So if you go to bandcamp.com and look up those albums, Dirty Laundry, Good Clean Music, 1985, you can find them there. I'm slowly gonna be moving them, everything to, you know, all the other platforms, but I'm working with my music publisher to do that.
And as a follow-up on that, Haynes asks, when do we get to see your next creation?
We're in development and in process with the theater, and hopefully in the next year, you know, with everything sort of times out well, I think that we might see something by early 2023. Great.
Have you connected, or this is from Frank Rizzo, have you connected with Tyler Perry, and will he direct the film version of A Strange Loop, or is that getting too meta?
So I have connected with Tyler Perry. He called me after I won the Pulitzer, and he congratulated me, and he also told me that he was going to beat my ass. He has not seen the show. He only has heard from what, so he had not heard the cast album, but then after we spoke, he texted me a screenshot of him having purchased the cast album and having listened specifically to the song Tyler Perry Writes Real Life, which leads me to conclude that he's probably only listened to that song and nothing else in the show. I could be wrong about that, but that would be that's the JB Fletcher in me would deduce that. I would say Tyler Perry directing A Strange Loop would be a hard no for me, but that's, you know, that I have a very rigorous artistic collaborative standards, and I just don't think that he and I are a match. I would never direct one of his movies or TV shows or stage plays, so I don't think he should direct mine.
I would just like to reiterate, Michael, that this conversation is being recorded for posterity.
That's fine.
So Ryan Odenak asks, what musicals inspired you for storyline?
For storyline, I think certainly Sweeney Todd is a big one. Showboat is another, and I don't mean in terms of like the storylines in those shows, but just in the way that storyline functioned. What else? I even think things like, even though there's not things like a chorus line, like just the personal stories of those dancers, I think really influenced me. Yeah, I mean, so many, I could go on forever.
So Tim Parsons asks, are the reactions you receive to shows like White Girl in Danger similar across all audiences, or do you get different, maybe wildly different reactions from different audiences, white, black, gay, straight, etc.?
Well, so far, White Girl in Danger has had 2 public performances of readings of the whole thing, and then there was a concert. There were a couple of concert versions that happened in 2017, and there've been smaller readings and things in between. And so far, it appears to me like the piece resonates across sort of all kinds of identity categories: race, age, gender, sexuality, and so forth. I think it's something that I'm keeping my eye on, particularly once the piece goes into production, because it's very provocative piece, and it's in some ways very political piece, though in what was presented today, you only get like little snatches of that. And so I'll be curious to see how certain groups of folks respond to it in actual, when it's like live and happening and like fully realized.
All right, so people are really picking up on this. Tyler Perry question here. So anonymous attendee, who we're going to assume is not Tyler Perry, asks, do you have a dream ideal directorial or writing collab? And then Haynes follows up asking, who would you want to direct A Strange Loop? John Chu, Spike Lee, Regina King?
I don't have a dream. Well, wait, I guess if I'm assuming that the dream director collab, that means like in theater or in a movie version, or those two separate things?
Well, maybe you can start answering the question and we'll give anonymous attendee a chance to follow up in the Q&A box there. But maybe we'll go to the second, we'll do the second one first. Who would you want to direct A Strange Loop? John Chu, Spike Lee, Regina King?
Those are my only options.
We'll say etc. et al.
So I was actually talking to some friends of mine about this the other day. I actually don't have like a dream director for A Strange Loop, like off the top of my head. Like weirdly, I'm like, can like Bob Fosse do it? You know, I mean, I don't know.
I'd like to see that.
I'm not literally thinking like Bob Fosse or like, I don't. For me, it's like, I feel the reason why I can't answer this question is because I just think I would have to have conversations with a lot of directors to talk to them about what it is that they see in the piece and how they would imagine it visually, because I only originally thought of A Strange Loop as being a theater piece. And I'm open to it being like a film or, you know, a television series or something like that. But I don't know who are the people who resonate the most with me. There are certainly directors who I think I like their work, but that doesn't mean I think that they should direct my work. Like sometimes I think it's the same thing about people say, would you like to write for this show or that show? And I'm like, no, I just want to watch that show. I don't want to write for it. Like I loved Stranger Things. I loved it more than I loved anything in a long time when I watched it. But I also was like, oh, I would never want to write for this because I think it would ruin the magic of it for me.
So anonymous attendee says, let's go with both. Who's your ideal collaborator on stage and on film, if you have one?
I mean, on stage, I mean, I've loved working with Stephen Brackett more than anything. He is like such a treasured collaborator to me, and like I would like to work with him again on something else. I've been working with Liliana Blaine Cruz on White Girl in Danger, and she is a dream, and I want to continue to work with her. As far as people I have not worked with or are not working with, I've always been such a huge fan of David Cromer, and I would love to I would love it if there was a project that we could work on together. Who else? I'm like blanking at the moment, but those are like some stage folks who I'm really into. As far as film, that's a tough one for me because I had like hated so many things for so long that I don't really have any favorites. Like if I could go back in time, John Cassavetes. But then maybe John Cassavetes is again one of those directors where I just want to watch him do his thing and not, maybe he would be annoying to work with for me because of how he works to do what he does. But I love John Cassavetes.
Well, I just want to know more about that. What do you love about John Cassavetes? Because I too love John Cassavetes.
I love his like the way that he digs into the most agonizing center of a moment, the way that he captures the people in their most sort of grotesque and doesn't flinch away from it. Like the scene from Minnie and Moskowitz when Minnie is on the date with Zelmo is, to me, one of the most glorious scenes of like a bad date that has ever, like the only other person who then for me came along and touched it at any remotely was Todd Solondz in Happiness, when he does the beginning of that movie, the date between John Lovitz and not Hope Davis. I always forget that actress's name, Jane Addams. And it's just the awkwardness and the way he just like stays with those people and he doesn't let you escape. And cinematically, just how he just forces you to live in these really uncomfortable moments with these actors who are delivering these performances that are like sustained. The tension is so sustained, comedically, dramatically, sometimes a mix. And I just find his work to be so thrilling.
I mean, I think that's a really interesting, question about values, and aesthetic values. Like, what is it about that kind of scene that sort of keeps you, present in those kind of really awkward, uncomfortable emotions? I mean, I squirm in my seat just at the mention of the opening scene of Happiness. Like, I haven't seen that movie in 25 years. I remember that scene like it was yesterday, and it's awful.
I did, BAM had me do this thing where they screened the film that I liked and I talked about and stuff, and I chose Happiness, which I had only ever seen on like VHS or something. I'd never seen it on the big screen, and I watched it and I marveled at Todd's just ability to get those performances out of all of those, that how people forget that movie was like a powerhouse of talent. And that opening scene is devastating. It's like Chekhov. But Chekhov by way of like your darkest nightmare. Like, it's so good. It's not me, it's you. Like, for someone to say that about why they can't date you, it's not me, it's you. It's so real. It's painful, but it's real. And I think what I like about Todd's work and about John's work, it's just real. It's also like wild and out there, but and sometimes it's surreal, I guess, but it still has like a truthfulness to it. And I think that's ultimately the thing I'm looking for in any director I work with on stage or on screen, is are they someone who's really interested in like the capital T truth of the moment, not something they impose onto it, but that's like that they found in the text or in the images, the truth and the real reality.
So is that something, like, can you think back to like when you were in the production of A Strange Loop? Like, can you describe any moments like that where you saw, this thing that you wanted to happen, in that vein happen, where the director just sort of brought it out, and you saw that moment where you were like, wow, that is so uncomfortable, and that's going to be the moment where the audience really comes in and takes this personally?
I think there's a scene in A Strange Loop where Usher is on the subway and this guy starts flirting with him, and Steve, and what ends up happening is that as the audience, there's two things that happen. One is that you think that Usher and this guy are gonna like hook up together, and like Usher's like dreams of, his Carrie Bradshaw dreams of meeting someone just in the moment and like hooking up with them's gonna happen. But then you find out right into that this person is a figment of his imagination, and that he's white, and it's like it keeps opening up into like all these other things that Usher himself has created for himself in this story of his own failure. And I think Stephen really did a beautiful job of helping us navigate that really gingerly without giving anything away or asking the actors who is playing, because it's an all-black cast, asking the actors to like play this kind of whiteness that would make it like it creates it tricks the audience, I think, in a really subtle way. And I think that was like, I was really excited by the then devastation that comes from pulling the rug underneath once you realize what the gig is, the gag.
It's interesting. I mean, thinking about Cassavetes too, like when I think of Cassavetes, I also think of improvisation, right? So many of his films were, built off improvisations where
Right.
they developed them as they were going. And I think that's one of the, always to me, like one of the interesting things, like watching shows get put together that are going to go live on stage, is watching how a director, a really good director, is attuned to like everything that's being said and everything that they've planned on the stage. But then they also seem to have this other sense for accidents that happen on set that suddenly make sense, that suddenly, that just absolutely need to be incorporated into the show right now, and that nobody expected to happen.
Oh, I do that all the time. That happens all the time for me. Like that happened while we were doing White Girl in Danger at New York Stage and Film this summer. And the cast was all singing this big group number that then ends on them all on this big sort of like, everybody's doing legit like ha 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 kind of box singing. And one of the actors missed her cutoff and she kept going. And it like, and I was like, oh, we have to keep that because it added to the sort of comedy of the whole moment. And it actually is a perfect button for what that moment is, of how to end it. Of like this one person keeps singing their notes, even though everyone else has stopped. And it was like this happy accident just because the actor had made a mistake in the rehearsing of it. And it was beautiful.
We have a question from Tim Parsons. Are there a few shows or one show that you're really looking forward to as stages and theaters open back up?
Dana H. I'm really interested in. Didi O'Connell is such a genius, and watching her like lip sync a whole play, like I'm like weirdly intrigued by that. And other than that, I'm curious. I've never seen or read Trouble in Mind, so I am interested just because I read about it and this sort of story around it, and I've watched some short scenes of it from like regional productions, and so I'm curious to see what the story of this author from 1955, like how that resonates today. Like I'm curious about that production. Those are two that come immediately to mind.
Yeah, I saw Dana H was written by Lucas Nath, who also won the Windham-Campbell Prize a few years ago.
And I went to school with Lucas.
Yeah, wonderful playwright. And for me that really resonates because first of all, it's an amazing play where you have the story is when it's a true story. His mother was basically kidnapped and held hostage by this kind of prisoner. She had been working as a psychologist for when many years ago, and when Lucas was in college, I think, and he could never get her to tell him the full story, so he got a friend to record her telling the story, and the whole play is made on her, based on her recordings of her telling her own story, and the performance of it is completely one actress lip syncing the performance of his mother's voice throughout, and it's a really astonishing thing. But for me, it resonates partly also because I think, as I told you, when we went to record at the Vineyard, I realized that not only was that the last play I had seen before the pandemic hit, but it was the last play, last theater I had been in, the last place I had visited in New York, like about a week before everything shut down.
Oh, wait, and there's one other thing I'm looking forward to that I'm going to see next week. I'm going to Arkansas next week to see Designing Women at Theater Squared. I'm a Designing Women super fan. I'm also a Designing Women critic, but because I'm a super fan, it feels important for me to go see this like reimagined stage version of this sitcom that is an important part of my pop culture story. So I'm really excited to see that.
And is that being done as a musical or as a
No, it's
drama?
a play. Linda Bloodworth Thomason, the creator of the show, has created this like 2021 or 20, I think it's 2020 version, because I think it's in relationship to the 2020 election somehow. with the same characters, and I think she's written some additional characters into it. So I'm like so excited to see what that will be.
So I'll shout out to our audience. Our Q&A box is empty. I'm asking a lot of questions here. So if anybody has some more questions before we finish up with Michael, but Michael, I'll just keep asking him because I could talk to you all day. So, you and I have talked quite a bit in the last couple of months, putting these videos together and chatting, and some of that is recorded already in some of the on-demand content. And a lot of what we've talked about has been about storytelling and about soap operas and about fiction versus reality and these kinds of things. But one thing that we really haven't talked about is music. And you're a fairly unique phenomenon in the musical theater world, in that you do the books, lyrics, and music, which can be 3 separate jobs often, or 10 separate jobs, depending on what's being worked on. And you take hold of all 3. So I wonder, why don't we talk a little bit about your life as a musician? I mean, how did you come into music, and then how did that eventually develop into an interest in musical theater as a career?
Yeah, so I started taking piano lessons when I was like 8 years old. My dad had a colleague at his job who he offered to teach me and my brother piano, and so we started taking piano lessons. I don't think I liked it very much in the very beginning, but over time I started to get into it, and I started playing piano at church for church choirs and stuff. And I think in hindsight, that experience influenced my compositional style, which is very almost like finger painting. Because when you're playing in like a church, like I did, or at least the kind of church I grew up in, everything is just about like chord changes and improvising. And I think a lot of my compositional style grew out of just every Sunday and every day practicing and just like literally making things up as I went along. And I used to try to write, once I discovered like Tori Amos, I wanted to imitate her. And so I used to try to write songs like her, but I didn't understand song form. And so all I had were just like my musical sort of stylings. And I gave up trying to write lyrics at that point, and then went to school for playwriting. And then I went to NYU grad musical theater writing for book writing and to learn how to write lyrics. And once I got a grasp on lyric writing, which ended up being a really good container for a lot of the writing I had been doing since I was, writing growing up, the musical impulses had somewhere to go. And so that improvisational style then just sort of converged on my lyrical style, and the songwriting grew out of that. And for many years, I would not even call myself a composer. I would say I'm a songwriter. Composers are people who study in the academy, and they are Beethoven, and they're Carole King, and they're Stevie Wonder, and they're like those special people. And I'm just a humble songwriter. But as the songwriting began to integrate with the playwriting, it all fed each other, and I then came to accept the title of composer.
When we've talked about music, off camera, you're always mentioning these indie rock goddesses of the 90s, Liz Phair and Tori Amos. And what is it that draws you to that particular, was it just the moment when you grew up, or was it something specific to that style of music?
Well, I think Tori's music, specifically her music, is such a mix of like classical influences and like sort of her 70s songwriter influences and other things. And then Liz is like, her lyrical stylings are so deadpan and like a knife through hot butter. And I just think that those two in particular, I just was inspired by their sort of badasseries. They just did what they wanted to do. They broke the mold. Like they just were, this is what I am doing, and I'm figuring out as I go along. And I just think that just the impulse to do that inspired me, even if like my music was, or lyrics were different from theirs. But like I took that impulse of like, just do what you want. But I'm also inspired by lots of other music too that I don't talk about as much, but Joni Mitchell is another big one. I would say I never really realized it until recently. I think Billy Joel is somebody who musically has inspired me in certain ways. Um, all of like Motown everything. Like that was my first music that I grew up listening to because my parents are children of, you know, the 50s and 60s and 70s. So the Motown sound, the sort of Philadelphia sound, all of that, like if you listen to any of like any vocal arranging that I do, all of it is like directly influenced by like the Temptations, the Spinners, Earth, Wind and Fire, Ray Goodman Brown, groups like that. So I pull, and then not to mention all of the gospel music that I grew up hearing my entire childhood is very much inspired, is in there too. So I pull from everything. It just so happens that there are these sort of maybe main influences who that were like these real consistent touchstones over time. And Tori and Liz are certainly, and Joni. I always call Joni the mother, Liz the daughter, Tori the Holy Ghost. Is like they're like my holy trinity. I mean, and there's others who fit into that as well, but like those three are the ones who like
said the boy who turned away from the Lord.
Yeah. Exactly, you know. But those three are three ladies who I just am so inspired by their independent mindedness and their ability to do their art on their own terms.
Okay, well, I think we got one more question coming in here from the audience, and then I think maybe I'll do one after that, and then I think we'll finish up for the day. Okay. The question from the audience is an anonymous attendee. What are you reading these days? Fiction, nonfiction, anything?
Oh, I wish I could say that I was reading anything right now. There are things I want to read. I have so many books on my shelf that I need to read. I'm trying to think, what was the last thing I read? Oh, the last thing I started reading was How to Be an Anti-Racist, but that was more for research than for pleasure. And I didn't finish it. So I need to take the time to finish it for my research. Peter Marcus has a book out that he sent me that I need to read. It came in the mail like a week or so ago. I can't remember the title of it. If Pete wants to put that in the chat. But I'm looking forward to doing that. Pete is an incredible prose writer, Peter Marcus. So I have a lot of things like on my shelf to be read once I get through some deadlines and have the brain space. I really wish that I'm just putting this out into the universe. Someone needs to create a residency that is specifically for people to apply to go away to read. That is like literally what they're for. That they're not for you to go and write. I mean, you could write on your own time or whatever, but like there's something like I think you should have to like apply and be like, these are the books I'm gonna read. And maybe even I'll write a book report or like, but I really have been wanting that for a while, that I would like a residency that's literally, you go away for a month and you read every day in this retreat. And that's what it's for.
I think Daniel Handler, the guy at Lemony Snicket, I think he used to host these like silent reading parties in San Francisco, where he would invite people to come to a bar or something like that, or a hotel, and everybody would just bring a book and sit silently reading together for like an hour, which I always thought was wonderful.
Well, I don't want to read with people. I want to read in the silence of like a nice room or on a porch or something, or like facing mountains or water. But that is an admirable thing that he does.
We did get one more question here. With all the research you do, how long does it take you to finish one song on average?
It really depends. All the songs have their own sort of, they decide like how long it's going to take. Like I can impose a certain amount of structure on it, but if I like haven't figured it out, it won't come like just because I want it to. So sometimes it can happen very quickly. Sometimes it takes a long time. Like there was a song that I started writing the music for like 15 years ago, and it was just this piece of music that I just kept playing and playing and playing and playing. I just couldn't figure out what the lyrical line or the content was, but I liked the accompaniment. And then during the pandemic, the Guggenheim asked me if I had if I want to write a song for online content or whatever. And I was like, sure. And I was like, I don't want to have to come up with something from scratch. And I remembered I had this piece of music that I had just been sitting with for years and years and years. And then that forced the song to come, weirdly. And so then that happened. But then other songs, like I've written songs in a day. So it truly depends on just the energy and the muse sort of letting it flow.
So last question, Michael, from me. This is just more of a sort of, so you can give a shout out to any young artists in the audience. What's your advice for the young artist who wants to get into musical theater writing?
My advice for writers who want to get into musical theater writing is to read plays, to read and see as many plays as you can. And also listen to cast albums and to really get in touch with who you are as an artist, independent of like what other people might want for you and like what your obsessions are. That's something Peter Marcus used to always say to us when we were back in the 90s. It's like, what are your obsessions? And writing them down and writing about those same things over and over and over again. I think that's an important thing for any writer of any genre to do, but I think in musical theater, it can be really helpful as well. As far as like practically getting into musical theater, I think another aspect is to remember that art takes the time that it takes. And I think musical theater a lot of times takes a lot of time. And that's not a bad thing. Like taking a lot of time to create something is good, but spend your time wisely. And just really get in touch with who you are, who your characters are, what they want, what the conflict is, what music you like, facility of language. There's a lot of things that go into it. Who do you like collaborating with? Musical theater, even if you're somebody who is a multi-hyphenate, musical theater is still an incredibly collaborative art form. And so you have to be somebody who loves to collaborate with other people. Because at some point, in order to do a musical, you will need, whether it's a director or a producer or a lighting designer or a music director or an arranger or a copyist or whatever it is. There's so many different people who could be a part of any team. So you have to really want to be you can't be an antisocial musical theater writer. It just doesn't work.
Michael, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to chat with you over the last hour. And I wish you the best of luck with everything going forward. And,
thank you. It's been a pleasure to speak with you, Michael.
Yeah, likewise. And I'd just like to say to the audience, this is the first of 9 weeks of these events. So I hope you'll join us at the same time next week when we'll be with one of the Windham-Campbell Prize recipients in nonfiction, the legendary nonfiction writer, Vivian Gornick. So thank you and see you next week. Bye now.
Hi, everyone.